On one planet was once a race of creatures who ran. They were eventually replaced by a race which sat and thought. They in turn sat around for thousands of years waiting for something in them to replace themselves. To help ease local conditions, life gave men watches so they could watch the time and not be so much concerned over all that other stuff. Whee! Look at me, Daddy. I'm staring and in a stupor. Well, that's great, son. Simply great. The mythical warrior typically spends part of a lifetime struggling against confining external forces to eventually see that the real restrictions are within himself. Then comes more time spent trying to attend to his internal captivity, which, if things go well, ultimately results in him developing a whole new understanding of just what freedom consists of. Simple men are simply confined, though they perceive the causes of their confinement to be extremely complex. To get past this, open your eyes. Just look around you at the obvious. A man once said to a mystic, "It seems to me that there should be two general forms of mystical teaching. One form that talks to you about whatever it is that it wants to talk about, and another form that will talk to you about whatever it is that you want to talk about." To which the mystic responded, "The second variety you must produce for yourself, but you'll find that even with just yourself involved, it's not as easy to accomplish as you would expect." In later days, as the man studied and struggled with what the mystic had said, he experienced bouts of surprising amazement and excitement over the idea, which obviously is illogical and impossible, and yet there it is. Right within himself, he found the reality of just how difficult it is to think about anything other than what your thinking already wants to think about. Repetitiveness is part of life's normal safety procedures. But within a hungry man's consciousness, it serves no such purpose. Which will happen first? Talk will exhaust reality, or talk exhaust itself? Which will occur first? Thinking will explain everything, or thinking explain itself? One man with important matters on his mind would only write about them as long as he had paper. In man's ordinary state of consciousness, you'll continually stare out the window and never become aware of the room you're in. This bit of information could have been titled "The Foyer to the Secret." And a viewer writes, "But you once noted that, what good does it do to know yourself if you end up knowing the wrong self?" See, all of us out here don't forget everything we hear. Plus, what do you mean by that? Man is the only creature held captive by chains unseen, which makes escaping them impossible. There was once a man beset by a trio of demons: the body demon, the mind demon, and the emotions demon. And he finally prayed to God to be released from the grip of at least one of them. And God listened, then asked him which one he'd choose. A man once asked a mystic, "Is this whole business of trying to become enlightened more serious than it appears, or less so?" And the mystic asked him which one he'd choose. Those of routinely shaped intellectual processes continue to ponder the questions inherent in the matter of cause and effect. Yet to realize that all thinking, and certainly not excluding that herein under discussion, that all thinking itself is an effect, the cause of which none seem interested in investigating. Trains have windows so that you'll look out them. Okay? Stare at them. And thus reduce the possibility of you taking notice of your position thereon. Life's mental circumstances has named this particular song, "Come Go Through This World With Me," as if men normally have a choice. Without thought, you can't be afraid, but with it, you can talk and thus mitigate the fear. And high up in the nervous system, a voice says, "I don't get it." And further down, one that can't speak does. A man asked a mystic, "Do you keep talking about the whole mystical thing in pretty ordinary terms just so as you won't start describing it in the really weird ones that it deserves?" And studying his skull, which he held in his hand, a mystic said, "Ah, I once knew me well." Education versus the knowledge. It's not stupidity that gets you, but the stupor. Everyone's brain is a spigot. The speaker addressed the crowd. "Tell me what you worry about, and I'll tell you how conscious you are." And a voice shot back, "But if a man was just conscious enough to actually be considered conscious, wouldn't he not be worried about anything anyway?" And the speaker replied, "Ah, you caught me." And the crowd broke up and laid in the grass. The difference between a real mystic and wannabes is that the wannabes are always looking for a real mystic. This is why, past a certain point in his understanding, a mystic has nothing else to read nor anyone else to listen to. "It's all there," announced the conductor. "What's all there? And where is there?" asked many passengers. "Why, Istanbul," he replied. "It's right there, in each of you. Though the way there and the duration of the journey may not be what you'd expect. But so what? Isn't it good to know that it still exists and is much closer than you ever imagined?" Those most simple feel as though they live primarily in their body, while those more sophisticated think they reside mostly in their mind. And they both would have to acknowledge that a continuing part of their life is spent in their emotions, but neither of them see anything in their situation of any particular interest. And as long as your brain is just a normal mortal outlet for life's energy, you'll never see anything of any specific significance. And a more enlightened version of the philosopher said, "My thinking thinks for me, therefore I remain in this partial stupor." Conditions on one world told the wild birds, "You have your choice as you fly above, to be presently shot down or postpone it by believing that you have a choice." No. "Daddy, Daddy," squealed a lad back on earth, "I want to be a mallard when I grow up." "Shush," replied Papa, "no need for such a wish." A warrior who is not also a poet is not a fully realized warrior. Discovery and destruction alike must the hero be able to privately describe to himself when called for. But note, this poetry would differ radically from the routine in that it would be totally non-subjective and self-referable, while entirely cold-blooded and to the point. Even a consciously conceived and Even a consciously conceived and reticent recluse may still talk to himself when the moon is full and he near empty. To the more awakened vine, it is not the fault of the words spoken, but of the generally ennobling passions that motivate men to speak them. A man full of himself will ne'er a hero be. What men ordinarily refer to as their thinking turns out to be no more than a passive staring at the flow out of the faucet. By talk alone do the ordinary feel less stupid. Hint, to even get close to the secret, you must first wear yourself absolutely out. Anything said about man, spoken under normal gravitational conditions, will come out sounding like criticism of man. One guy rang up Life and said, "Disconnect my cable service, if you please." And Life just chuckled. If you please. The secret life of talk. The ordinary think there's more to it than there is. Unrecognized by all but a few, there is a stupefying energy that clouds men's minds. It is known as thought. Ordinary, everyday thought. When you've been swallowed by a beast with a scarlet stomach lining, it's difficult to ever make objective observations regarding the color red. The simple-minded, that is, including the ordinarily educated of the world, continue to wonder which has the greater effect on what they are, their inherited traits or their environment, as though they can somehow be distinct from the environment. The difference between the more conscious and the routinely so is that even though they are both at home, the routinely conscious never come to realize it. The sound of passion in an ordinary man's speech is like a dash of salt added to an otherwise unappetizing plate of cardboard. One chap wrote a song he titled, "My Thinking is a Prison." But it so depressed him that he tore it up and would only perform it on special occasions. The confused, that is, ordinary people, believe man can change the conditions of life, failing to notice that they are already products of life's conditions. But it's just as well, for if an ordinary man did suddenly understand this, it'd blow his eyeballs out of their sockets. Men initially ride off on the adventure of life being either nights with hemorrhoids, delusions, or depression. 'Tis not the journey that's tiring, nor even the load you bear, but rather something else entirely, something unrealized, unrecognized, yet right before your eyes. The three stages in the life of those who know the secret. In the first stage, they try and tell about it using 26 words. In the second stage, they attempted using only 5. And in the final stage, you guessed it, they quit trying. There is, I might add, a fourth stage, but what the hell can I now possibly say about it? A man asked a mystic, "What's the purpose in a mystic saying what a mystic would do in this or that situation regarding this or that matter?" And the mystic replied, "None that I'm aware of any importance." If men experienced even brief interludes of being more conscious than they ordinarily are, it would cause their normal state to feel intolerable. See why staring is such a basic requirement? Talk may be the consummate stalling tactic, the supreme stiff arm, man's ultimate whistling in the dark. A man asks himself, no one takes responsibility for their inherited physical makeup, so why do they regarding what they think and their emotional life? Hey, where are you going? I ain't sticking around for an answer. Today's jackpot question is, if the more conscious get sick and die like everyone else, then do they have more or less a right to complain than everyone else? The difference between a real warrior and the weekend variety is that while the weekenders may become able to refrain from saying damn when they stub their toe, the real warrior is able to not think it. To begrudge ordinary men their talk is to disfavor their breathing. Everyone starts off thinking with their feet. Then it moves up to their head, and with most, that's where it seems to end. Yes, sports fans, that last play was 3rd and 3, and they're attempting to bring out the chain stretcher. A chef up in the stands then wondered to himself if that was anything like a reality extender. A certain man once built a ventriloquist dummy, but its mimicking of speech was always dependent on how he felt. A father so advised a son, once you hear ordinary talk for what it is and realize what it represents, the sheer grossness and stupefying weight of its negativity will tend to turn its very sounds detestable and unbearable to your ears. Only physicians who cause their own ills can rightfully undertake to cure themselves, all of which demands a new level of understanding regarding the problems which seem to afflict man. A man asks a mystic, if, as you say, at all times is well over 99% of all men without any interest in this so-called expansion of consciousness, that leaving but a scant few who are, then how can you be truly certain that the vast majority of quite normal, sane men are not the ones with the correct attitude and the mystical few who are misguided? And I'll give everyone time to leave, assuming that few care to stick around for any comment I may have on the matter. As children, men start out speaking literally, and as they mentally mature, they unknowingly switch to a metaphorical mode. And only the more conscious ever become aware of this and do something about it. Something or other. And a man wrote to the answer doctor and asked, just what the hell does talk have to do with emotions anyway? Says one guy, for men to call the perfunctory operations of a physical organ, the brain, by a metaphysical name, the mind, strikes me as both a stretch and crude attempt at self-aggrandizement. In the prison of routine existence, talk provides ordinary men with some feeling of freedom. According to legend, there was once an extreme mystical order which said that no one is truly a mystic who is not constantly as conscious, alert, and aware as they know from experience that they can be. It is also said that there were few present who mourned the passing of this order. A mystical warrior can only be slain during life while he's looking away. Looking away. And that certain king so said to another of his sons, if you do not have a noble dog after whom to pattern yourself, use as your hero then life itself. But if you so do, after you have once begun, then from life never look away. I'm going to talk about talk and point out that it indeed is more symbolic tonight as opposed to simply metaphorical, because what I'm going to say applies to talk in the ordinary exercise of this activity, but it also, I intend something else simultaneously. Not all that obscure, it being the fact that talk is a prerequisite for life as we know it. Without talk, there would be no ignition of the human intellect, and you just waste your time if you also get caught up in the old quandary as to does thought produce talk, does talk produce thought? I threw in a news item tonight covering that. How ordinary people still wrestle over what seems to be the indigenous problems in the question, the whole affair of cause and effect. And you do not have to be a philosopher to be involved, be affected by the questions of cause and effect, because people are discussing the matters continually. They discuss it on the basis of their political views, their arguments against local politicians, religiously. People are continually involved, and from a more expanded view, they are misled and always trying to find out what is the cause of something and what is its symptom. What is the cause and what is the mere effect? For those of you that missed it, I'll rephrase the news item. Save yourself a croaker bag full of sweat. And let me point out to you what you should be able to see. If you've got anything resembling an intellect functioning above the absolute automatic level, you should be able to realize, at least periodically, at least when pointed out to you, that everything about man is an effect. It's a symptom. And you have got to be just dangerously tied to ordinary, meaningless intellectual processes not to be able to see that. In other words, you'd be at the same level as wondering which came first, the chicken or the egg, which has more effect on what I am, my genes or my environment, which has the greater impact on humanity in general, nature and nurture. Does poverty cause crime? Does crime cause poverty? It goes on and on. Did man sin and thus create sin, or was sin already inherent and it made Adam fall? The mind, being nothing at the ordinary level but a function of a binary operation, continually believes that whatever it may observe may not be the end of it, which helps protect the obvious, because if you look at something and you think, well, I have a very good opinion of this, I think I have some understanding of this. If you do not do it, someone else, as soon as you express it, someone else, whether they use these terms or not, will point out to you that, well, what you're seeing is not the cause. You're simply seeing an effect of it. You're simply seeing a symptom. And it will drag back into the dance the best of city-bred minds a man with a PhD in philosophy, political science, a man with a Nobel Prize in some field of human activity, intellectual activity, he can make a statement that will seem just as firm and conclusive on his part as possible, unless someone points out in some way that, all right, what you say, according to your statistics or according to the information that you presented, let's assume that your observations thus far are valid, what you described for me. But for you to close the door, for you to say, here is an explanation of something, my dear sir, you are somewhat premature. Because from my view, all you're observing, although albeit new and refreshing the way you put it, it is simply a symptom of something else. And assuming that he is an ordinary, sane mind, it will trip him up, drag him back into the dance, you understand. It's supposed to. That is, he will feel uncertain. He'll begin to slobber on himself. He'll have to go, well. And if he doesn't do it externally, he's doing it internally. Why is that? And I guess if I brought that up and anybody would listen, some philosopher somewhere would say, well, wait a minute, I'll write a paper on that. Let me write that down. And he'd go with that. There is no discussion as to why. There's no doubt as to why that's true. I just told you. Everything's a symptom. And I can put it in such a simple way that even simple, ordinary minds momentarily are confronted with the reality of it. And that is everyone from theologians to scientists know damn well, once it's pointed out very quickly, that man is not the source of anything. And everybody goes, well, yeah, okay. But it's like staring into the sun. It is like looking at the obvious. People turn right away. They'll even admit, oh, yeah, I see what you're talking about. But then operationally, it might as well be non-existent. It has no effect. Not because of stupidity, because of the binary operations of the intellect. Back to talk. Don't worry about it. I'm telling you, without talk, man would not be man. No matter what else, anything else that you come up with, anything else that ordinary minds would speculate upon or theorize, culture, the arts, science, religion, no matter what they say, it's still a fact. You take whatever subject they pick out, someone could say, well, that is not the bottom line. The bottom line would be that without the arts, man would not be what he is. Without his culture, man would not be man. He would simply be an animal that might be walking upright and wearing glasses and pencils in his pocket, but he would not be man without the arts, without culture. All right, let's say that. I'll go with that. But the thing is, he would not have art or culture if he couldn't talk. Man would not have anything that is unique to the life of man could he not talk. You can then look at talk over the last at least decades of months. I have written news items, put words in fictitious people's mouths, taking what would appear to be at the surface shots at talk. It's not either, the fact that men talk and what they talk about is not either right or wrong from any view. But let's take a view. An ordinary mind would even find the beginning of it to be critical, and it's not, but I can't help it. I keep backing up, warning people who might be tuning in or trying to listen to some of this. At the ordinary level, anything you say about man, if it goes into any depth, if it's any more than describing the man over there, and so I'd say he's 6 feet tall. And even that is open to an interpretation of criticism. The point is, anything you say about man at the ordinary level, to ordinary ears, will sound as though it's critical. Now, I was trying to figure out the absolute, or find something approaching the innocuous, but even as I said it, right before as I was thinking, I was trying to show that past just the minimal expression, the minimal observation regarding man, anything after that sounds critical. At first I was trying to figure out one that would be hard-pressed to be seen as critical, to say, well, that guy over there strikes me as 6 feet tall. That might fly with most people, but if you said that to a large enough crowd, somebody in the crowd would take it to be that you don't like people that height. Which I know sounds silly, but to the ordinary mind, not a deranged mind, but the ordinary, a mind of an ordinary man can go Well, that's what he pointed out. This ordinary listener could think, well, I don't see the point either. It sounds foolish to me, but why would he stop and say, well, this man over there, I would say is 6 feet tall, right there. The mind says, well, why the hell did you stop and point that out? If you're not critical, why point out anything? Unless you have some, as they call it nowadays, some personal agenda in mind. If you don't have some personal feeling, why point out he's 6 feet tall? Because then they'd look at you and figure, well, you must be 5'10", you don't like tall people. Or whatever it is. Just, if you never realize that, it's hard to ever hear anything that is cold-blooded and objective enough to have any meaningful impact on your mind, because everything else you hear is criticism, and you either join right in like, hey, sock it to them, or else you go, well, that was uncalled for, which probably means that you're 6 feet tall. Or want to be. Talk from a view. If you could take this now, just imagine that you had some ability to be of sang-froid mental observation, that you could in some way be in some condition approaching the definition of objective, impartial, disinterested. And you looked upon talk. It seems almost without exception to be meaningless. Now it takes, I repeat, it takes a different view, not my view, not a prejudiced view that I'm trying to insinuate. It takes an absolute view not native to ordinary thought to see this. And I'm going to have to bring out an example for us to get any closer, even verbally. Let me pick out religion again, just because it is the example known to most people, is an area which almost everyone has some personal experience, some knowledge, and as always, religion is inclusive of more of the human activity than any other example, with politics now breathing down its honorable neck. But religion is still it, plus it has enough of the abstract to make it the best example. So here we go. Remember, this is from no one's view. It's not from my view. It's not from any religious view, either that I'm stating or I have secretly in mind. Just listen. Like that you are someone from another planet and you were here observing and you already knew enough about what was going on that what I'm saying made some sense. If you listen to people sit around and discuss religion, one more time, I know this is hard for ordinary people. I'm being charitable, say hard or difficult. That you've got no feeling about religion. You have no interest. You're not critical of it. You're just simply listening to people. You're simply listening to people discuss religion. You're simply watching general religious activity involving speech. There's not just one guy sitting there and us imagining that he's thinking religion. It's a group of people, ordinary, sane people, involved with talk about religion. Again, let me point out, I could use politics. Maybe I'll jump in and give an example. I could use arts. I could use social norms. But religion covers a wider background upon which to paint. If you start listening to people talk about religion, if you have no interest, but you know the basis of it and you hear their words, you understand the English language, and you would listen and you would think, that is absolutely the most inane, that is the most meaningless talk I have ever heard. That has less to, I can't imagine anything that humans could say that is less grounded in anything resembling reality, anything resembling pertinence to human existence. You also listen, and it is, if you can hear with an objective ear, men discussing religion, their tone, the passion, the talk itself, without any doubt, if you can hear it in a certain way, is the most mechanical, it is the furthest possible remove from anything resembling original thought. in the widest sense. It doesn't even come close to anything resembling creative, personally inspired insight of any kind. Contraire, it would seem as though, and they could explain it, and I might do so for them here momentarily, their view, it is almost entirely made up of the repetition of cliches. They call it, of course, the repetition of the Scripture. And you can watch several people talking, or they could be a convention, they could be a round table, some forum, men discussing something that religion and its religion, the position of religion in the 21st century. I mean, something, and there's people with degrees, all of them with some theological background, but perhaps additional degrees, dual degrees in psychology, philosophy, men of some intellectual repute. And now they sit and they start discussing. Of course, it gets worse, or it gets more obvious if we brought in, again, the people they could have degrees in education, but those are normally considered to be fundamentalists of whatever religion. Those that, with the greater passion, seem to take religion. They begin to talk. And if you just listen to them, it becomes a whole self-serving, nothing new there, but a whole self-serving conversation. That one person will say something and someone else will say, well, praise be to God, because as it says in Ezekiel so-and-so. And they'll all nod and somebody says, well, and also in Galatians, as it says so-and-so. And someone says, but as Jesus said such and such. And somebody says, yes, but as Peter wrote to the church in Damascus. And you listen. Now, I'm not making fun of this. You people know that. And no wise. But if you listen in a certain sense, and they all seem to be nodding, they seem to be enjoying it, they'll seem to get excited about it, and people begin to lean over in their chairs and go, yes, by God. And as happened when Daniel was in the lion's den, as it says in the book of Ruth, verse so-and-so, and mighty Jehovah said, blah, 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 blah. And they all go, yeah. And you listen, and all it is, about the best that you can make of it as being some display of intelligence is that apparently a large number of those people have memorized a great deal of the Holy Bible and have good memories. You listen to it. Mind you, again, this has nothing to do. You're going to miss it if you take it in any way as being critical. You should look at it and go, I put it in these simple words again, and it's those of you who have made any effort along this line know that it is much easier to say than it is to do. But if you could look at it totally objectively with no interest, you should not ignore it. Look how widespread religion is. Look what a part it is of the human history. You should look at that, such as the example I made up and any other examples you can think of, and go, what gives? Which is far beyond. It is just outside the realm of normal intellectual processes. I know people say that they try to do it, and scientists claim that they try to use that approach. But that is totally foreign and damn near impossible for the human mind to look at something that their mind first has the opinion, more or less. Well, just to start with, you're going to feel some criticism if you're ordinary. But to look at something like I described, and you look at, and as far as you're concerned, just on the surface of it, men discussing God and religion, men saying what God wants man to do or what God said, and you look at it and you think, it's just damn near insane. Except you look at them, and by every other appearance, they are sane, they're normal, and you realize all this simultaneously. And yet you have an almost certainty that there is not a whit of understanding on anyone's part talking about such things. Not any. A would-be mystic, someone who would approach the secret, you cannot turn away and just ignore it, or you're just wasting your life. It is then at that crucial point you should be able to look at it and say, and it's obvious that those people are getting something from it. Not in any conscious, willful sense, but if they were not benefiting from this, and we're going to have to call it palaver, mechanical, meaningless, inane babble. From one view. But were they not benefiting from it, you look at them, and you've already assumed that they are sane. They're as sane as anybody else in the ordinary world. They would not continue to do it. And based upon just that, up to that point, your mind would then have to say, I am absolutely at a loss as to why they would do it. I mean, I suggested some of you who liked it previously, when I was trying to give some of the hints, some of the examples of how life does hint as to what the secret is right out in public. As you recall, life sort of more or less requested that I cease doing that. Of course, if life had any great fear that too many people are going to hear my talk tonight about talk, I'm sure I would have received a same sort of caution, if not direct request from life not to do this tonight. But I pointed out one. You recall about the continuing, widespread rituals of speaking highly about the deceased, even when the deceased was not thought of by those making the eulogies 10 hours ago when he died. And I point out all the kinds of possibilities that you could see it, and you could take a critical view, you could take a sarcastic view, you could take a pro or con view once you're aware of the fact. There's no great secret that people will get up and speak highly of the dead when you saw them 2 days ago, that same person doing that, and you know that he hated the guy alive that's now dead, that he's laying there and he's standing over his body crying. You could take a positive or negative view of that. You could be critical of it, accuse people of cynicism, etc. Or you could take a more positive view and say, well, it's because of social norms. We just do that because the person's dead and it's just social custom. And I point out that neither one of those are satisfactory answers, and I point out that there is an obvious possibility as to why people do that, and that your mind would never come up with it. A distinct possibility that cannot logically be refuted, and that is the simple fact that everybody, no matter who they are, when they die, they immediately actually become a better person, and therefore people speaking highly of the dead, even if they didn't think so while they were alive, now have no choice, because their words, their talk now is an unwitting reflection of the reality that the person is better. And so they've got no choice. Their talk, it's the only thing they can do. Same way, similar situation. You look at people discussing religion and God, and from one view, from a very objective, a non-prejudicial view, you can look at that as an outsider, someone from another world, another reality, and realize that there is no insight, there is no understanding whatsoever, none, in what they're saying individually. None of them understand anything. That in a true sense, what they're saying might as well be babble. I mean literal babble. It might as well be blah, 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 insofar as them understanding anything they're talking about. That is a fact. That is not my opinion. Again, I repeat, I could have used politics. I could use sociology. I could use psychology. And it'd be the same thing. It could be psychiatrists sitting there discussing the latest findings, their latest conclusion regarding the nature of man. It could be sociologists regarding their latest finding. 10 years worth of statistical research and field work that now conclusively shows and helps explain some of the mass movements in the world of humanity. Or I could have political figures, men of stature, men of high office, or reporters, observers of the political scene, discussing about how government works and why it should be doing this and why it should not be doing that and how it's going to directly impact the people, each and every one of us. And we're not talking about what they're saying. Forget now whether it has any possible validity or whether they have any statistics or whether an ordinary mind can say, well, yeah, I believe that. Screw all that. You listen to it. And if you can do it with a disinterested mind, you understand that the people talking, looking as serious, and people in serious positions in life, that there is not one iota of understanding in any of them that they might as well be Henson Muppets. Of course, you ordinarily, you don't know what's causing them to do it. But once you see it, you understand that they might as well be, or from the Who dramas. They might as well, but they might as well be puppets, mimes. You look at it, and there is nothing going on other than the talk. I will assume I have about pushed the setup far enough. I cannot resist continuing to go back, because even now, if you don't watch it, you'll be sitting there and you have lapsed into taking this as being a criticism of at least specific forms of conversations with specific groups of people or types of people, or just a general slam on talk itself. And most people are just full of bullshit. And their talk reveals it. It doesn't matter if you say it's bullshit. That's not the point. Even if it's true, then no one understands this. No one's ever questioned this. That if what people are saying, all the way from religion, the area of religion, to politics, to psychology, if it is bullshit, okay, how come this? How come nobody goes, well, something else is afoot? Because they're benefiting from it. In other words, if what they're saying is meaningless, then wait a minute, what gives? Because if the content is jejune, if it is vacuous, if the significance of what they're saying is as vacuous and empty as their head is, and you can hear it, that they just open their mouth and go, yeah. Then the question is, what's going on? There is something going on that people do not realize. From a quiet, real view, it is non-gravitationally held. It is non-standard. It cannot be defended. It is simply a more expansive view, a more conscious view, with exceptions so small that they're meaningless. Human talk is jejune. It is without nourishment. It is meaningless. Insofar as you trying to take what is being said, and you understand what they're saying. Well, God said so-and-so. Or when humans act this way, when a man shows this kind of aggression, it's for sure. It is some response to a childhood and unconscious now trauma inflicted sexually upon him or her. There's no doubt about that. There's every doubt in the world. And I was just being funny with words there. It's just simply not so. It's not so, and it's not so. It's meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. Once you see that, and I can't convince you, nor would I try, even though I was throwing in the passion there to add a little salt. Fake passion. It's either that or 60 minutes worth of monotone. Which, speaking as the speaker, I could certainly deal with. Speaking on behoof of potential listeners, I think it would have more than its normal potential nitalness. So let's take my description up until now with no further speculations, no more of I suggest, and etc. You have a group of people sitting around, ordinary, sane people, and they're discussing, for instance, religion. They're discussing the Bible if they're Christians. They're quoting the Bible. They're saying what God wants, and they're all nodding. They're saying things like, praise be to God. And somebody tells a story about how they were pulling across a railroad track late at night with a station wagon full of children from school, and a train suddenly flew around the corner and hit them, or a tornado hits their house in the middle of the night, and it just crushes the house, and the tree fell upon it, and the person, the man and his wife and children, all get out, and they're being interviewed, and everybody looks at the house. It just smashed, and they were all in bed asleep, and the person says, well, it's great, though, to be a Christian and to know that somebody was looking after me. Again, no criticism. But if you listen to that, and that's one of the great stories being on for thousands of years, and it's going on tonight somewhere. Thank God being a Christian paid off because somebody up there was looking after me. What could be more meaningless? And that sounds as though it's not just a declaration of one's allegiance and faith and dependence on religion, but here is proof of it. There's no longer just speculation, because I now am a living witness to the benefits of being religious, because God looked after me and my family. Do I have to point out the obvious? Who sent the damn tornado down that way? I was trying to refrain from doing it, but I want to make sure that you got the point. Now, if you can refrain from taking any of that as critical, we're not being critical of Christians, I'm not being critical of that person, but there they stand. And by any, and you don't even have to have to pretend a very expansive, non-standard view of consciousness just to see this. From every other definition, from every other conception of what thought is about and talk is about, what that person just said damn near takes them out of the stream, or should take them out of the mainstream of routine sanity. That is, for a person to stand there, let's say it's on TV, you're just so used to seeing this, and everybody, it's just part of, there it is. The cameraman says, well, what happened? The reporter, he says, well, I don't know, it was suddenly the sound of a damn freight train. And before I knew it, the whole house, it was like the end of the world, the whole house collapsed. And the camera pans around, and sure enough, there's a tree big around as an attorney's greed. A tree has flattened the house, and he says, we were all asleep. We had no notice. No warning. It was just so we heard this noise, and within a split second, it was like we were all dazed, but here we are, and he's got his wife and all his little children here. And you look at it, and he says, I want to say one thing. It is good to live a Christian life, or whatever, a religious life. Because you can look at this. This is not theory anymore. It's not just some Christian up here flapping his gums at the camera. Here is a personal reality of it, the proof of it. Because look at that. No human should have gotten out of that building alive, out of that house. Look at it. And yet we all did. God looks after his own. If you take just that, I could have made it short, but just those 2 or 3 sentences there that man said, and from any ordinary view, you analyze those words, it's insane. Better description. It's meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. It is babble. No one, now let's go to thought. Look up any definition. Look up any description of what human thought is. And they'll say something about logical, that is at least logical within the context of its own structure and etc. Take just what he said. Those 2 or 3 sentences. The words are insane. They're meaningless. And yet they sound fine. It's part of the normal human verbal experience. What is going on with human talk that men never see? I'll make it real simple. One thing, my observation, first off, should have pointed you to it, no matter how meaningless, no matter how mechanical, no matter what inane, thoughtless, unattentive chatter, babble, palaver, screed may be coming out of anyone's mouth, they are benefiting from it. And we're talking about ordinary people. They are not stupid. They are not misled. They're not insane. They're not temporarily insane. This is the history of man. They are benefiting from it. First off, before I tell you the real punchline for the night, again, that should make you go, well, I am missing something. Everyone is normally missing something, because it's only if they are indeed sane by the ordinary view, and if what they're saying once you can hear it and see it, is meaningless and has nothing to do with their understanding. And yet, if they're sane, then they must be benefiting from it. Because they're not, then they're no longer sane. But once you hear that all human conversation is that way, and everybody out there is considered sane, then you're left with what should be the question that something else is going on that neither I, nor my mind, nor anyone else ever notices. Because it's too obvious. Here is the punchline for the night. Here's what talk does. Well, let me make sure you understand that. Talk that seems to have no relationship to any understanding. People repeating cliches. People whose intellectual life amounts to no more than a repetition of sloganeering, the quoting of somebody else. And you can listen to it and think, well, they're educated. They know the best quips, the latest quotes. They obviously read the latest magazines. But you hear that inside, if there is any sort of little activity that should be thought processes, it's not inherent in them, or it's not active. And yet they're standing there doing this, and people are listening and responding, and you look at it, and it's like it's a world of puppets. It's a world of just heads going meow, 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 and they're all nodding. They speak passionately. They get offended at words, and it's all inanities. You know what talk does? And this is at the heart of doing something on oneself. This is practical. You know what talk normally does? At its most inane, at its most mechanical, at its most meaningless level? Oh, yes. What it does with people, and especially when I say mechanical, you understand, it is always the cannibalism. It is always part of the normal sequence that human speech has undergone. You're in line. That's why I was bringing out the repetition of cliches and quotes, and the Bible, religion is just a great example, a great place to bring it up to people. They don't have to think. And they can even defend it. Well, you sure I don't have to think, because here it is. God said everything He needed for us, He wanted us to know, so, hey, I memorized it. I'm familiar with it. I study it. They don't call it memorizing. They call it, I study the Word. I try to let it sink in so it will influence. Here's what talk does. Here's how it is used in all people. What it does. We're talking about mechanical, ordinary talk, which that's the point up until now you understand. That once you can hear it, not because I say so, damn near 100% of everything that all humans say, everything, is meaningless, non-understood, not even thought-based for the particular person. Chatter, babble. It is absolutely mechanical. It is the opening of a faucet and it just comes out. But what is it that it does? What is it that benefits man? It gives a temporary focusing of the energy that runs the mind, as opposed to did I push it too far at the end to make it dramatic? Do you understand that there sits the people discussing? Well, here's what God wants, and here's what He said in the first book of Deuteronomy, and you hear there's 3 or 4 people, one guy's talking, blah, blah, blah. Maybe there's 3 or 4 sitting there, and you can see them, and a couple of them are maybe listening, and obviously one of them's ready to talk, and maybe a 4th one sitting over there. They're all sitting at the table, and one guy's going, nothing unusual. I don't mean to over-dramatize it, because everyone does it. But they're discussing it, and the camera's there. You're sitting there watching them, and one guy's going. And if you look, you realize he's not in any wise engaged in what normally is called reflection. He's not listening, or he's not working on something they already said. He's not internally going, He's in a stupor. Except it's nothing unusual. That is man's normal state. It is a flood. It's not a dripping of a faucet at night to which you become accustomed. It is an open faucet running through you. And it is unfocused. It has nothing to do with you, except if you're asked or if you think about it, you go, oh, it's me. Oh, yes, well, that's what I think. Bullshit. It just shows that you're of ordinary consciousness. It shows that you understand nothing. But you know what talk normally does? Even the repetition of cliches, even the quoting of others, which is, as I said, is about all 99% of human conversation amounts to. It gives men the impression individually that this one guy was staring, they get through talking, he goes, well, yes, but that reminds me also Paul, when he was speaking to the church in Athens, he said so-and-so. When you look, the guy was just staring off, and he understands no more than the rest of them, but suddenly he joined in. You know what he felt? You know how that benefited him personally? He could never explain it. Is that gave a temporary, this is all comparatively speaking, compared to what he was doing. He goes, oh yes, well, as Paul said in his address to the church in Athens, when he said, rah, 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 and you hear, well, that's just as inane and mechanical as everybody else. But suddenly he lit up and went, rah, 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 and seemed to have some passion, and you could look at it and go, you idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. Not that you do. The thing is, anything they're talking about, he doesn't know, but suddenly he went from, oh, well, oh, thank you, brother, but, if you recall, as Paul said when he was addressing the church in Athens, God wants a lot of children, and God will always reward you for this and that. And you think, what a load of, the man's crazy. Is he listening? Has he got any awareness that he doesn't know anything of what he's talking about? Not that there is anything to know, but he's not aware of it. That's not the point. He felt better right then by quoting the Bible, or he could have been quoting Thomas Jefferson under another context. His mother. You know what it does? Comparatively speaking, it focuses his attention in a way that's normally just an open, diffuse facet of what we call thinking. The mental energy that life runs through man as an open, I've been saying faucet tonight, as opposed to S-E-W-E-R, but it's like a faucet. And what talk normally does is gives men a pleasant feeling, comfortably speaking, that at least when they're talking, especially if they got something to depend on, cliches, the thoughts of others, but it's still, that's not the point. They feel as though they're focused because they open their mouth and it's as though they actually said something. Then the rest of them perhaps nod, and he goes back to, that's why a mystic hates to be asleep. You mean in bed at night? That too.